Good morning. The message I will be reading for today is taken from the second book of Kings, chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. Just before God took Elijah to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on a walk out of Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here. God has sent me on an errand to Bethel." Elisha said, "I'm not letting you out of my sight." So they both went to Bethel. The guild of prophets at Bethel met Elisha and said, "Did you know that God is going to take your master away from you today?" "Yes," he said, "I know it, but keep it quiet." Then Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here. God has sent me on an errand to Jericho." Elisha said, "Not on your life. I'm not letting you out of my sight." So they both went to Jericho. The guild of prophets of Jericho came to Elisha and said, "Did you know that God is going to take your master away from you today?" "Yes," he said, "I know it, but keep it quiet." Then Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here. God has sent me on an errand to the Jordan." Elisha said, "Not on your life. I'm not letting you out of my sight." And so the two of them went their way together. Meanwhile, 50 men from the guild of prophets gathered some distance away while the two of them stood at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and hit the water with it. The river divided, and the two men walked through on dry land. When they reached the other side, Elijah said to Elisha, "What can I do for you before I'm taken from you? Ask anything." Elisha said, "Your life repeated in my life. I want to be a holy man just like you." "That's a hard one," said Elijah. "But if you're watching when I'm taken from you, you'll get what you've asked for. But only if you're watching." And so it happened. They were walking along and talking. Suddenly, a chariot and horses of fire came between them, and Elijah went up in a whirlwind to heaven. Elisha saw it all and shouted, my father, you, the chariot and the cavalry of Israel." When he could no longer see anything, he grabbed his robe and ripped it.
One of the most gripping stories of the Old Testament surrounds the life of Elijah the prophet. It makes for great Sunday school. How many of you have heard the story of Elijah the prophet in Sunday school? Okay, there's a bunch of you. How many of you have heard it in a sermon? Wait 20 minutes, you can all put your hands up. Prophets come out of nowhere in the Old Testament. They're not religious, they're not priests, and they hardly have anything to say to the priests, which is interesting because they've got a lot to say about God. They're usually talking either to political leaders, to the media, or to the general population or groups within it, like rich people, or poor people, or women, or men, or any group like that. And they've usually got one theme going, and it's this: if you knew the contract you had with God, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. Let me fill you in. And then they disappeared. No time for an interview. Where did they go? There were groups of these that existed. Nobody knows where they came from. They're not accredited. But man, are they effective. And every once in a while, one would pop up. Elijah is one such. And the Bible simply says, one day he appeared to the king. Boom. Just like that. And he said to the king, "You're screwing up. There's not going to be any rain. I said so. Bye." You know, sound bites. These guys have got it mastered. And then he took off. And there follows after that one of the greatest showdowns that's ever been written up. It's called Mount Carmel, where he said, "You get your people, I'll meet them there." The problem we've got here is that you call God Baal and you worship God the way everybody else does, and God isn't like everybody else's God. We're going to show you. So I'll tell you what, bring all your priests and all your prophets here. Let's have a great sacrifice. You build an altar. You call on your God to send fire down and consume the sacrifice. Let's see what happens. No? Stand back. I'll build one. That's the thing with water. Now I'll call on the Lord our God. And down comes the fire. Boom! Consumes everything. Steams up all the water and kills the prophets. There. Showed you. Except. And that's usually where the Sunday school story ends. In the next second, he realizes what everybody realizes when they've had a showdown and there's a mountain of corpses to show. You ready? Nothing's changed. There's a contract out on him, and the people in power are going to replace those prophets by Saturday afternoon, and they're after him. Now he's on the run. Everybody said when it happened, the Lord is God, the Lord is God. You're on your own. And the people in power are still the people in power. Pardon me, could I just get on a soapbox for a minute? 3,000 years later, we don't seem to have got the message. You keep doing what you're doing, mountains of corpses, you keep getting what you're getting, nothing changes. Just saying. There he goes. And he's met along the way by God, who says to him, he asks him a question I never, ever want God to ask me. He says, what are you doing here, Elijah? What do you mean? What am I doing here? You're God, don't you know? What are you doing here? I have been very zealous for the Lord my God. I called for that showdown. I expected something to happen. It didn't happen. And now, I'm the only one left and they seek my life. And God says, have a little something to eat. Then he takes off again to Mount Horeb. And now we're raising the stakes. Mount Horeb is another name for Mount Sinai. It's a Deuteronomic name for it. And at Mount Sinai is the place where the law of God was given and the covenant of God with Israel was established. And it's like he's going back there to say, we need to do this all over again. You've got to kickstart the whole thing. We need a fresh covenant. The people have forgotten everything and I'm a failure. And God says to him again, what are you doing here? Start it all over. And so along comes the wind, but God isn't in the wind, and the fire, but God isn't in the fire, and the thunder, but God isn't in the thunder. All of those showed up the first time. All of them show up the second time, except the first time, God was in that stuff, and the second time it's just a lot of noise. And when it's done, there is, some people say a breeze, some people say a whisper, some people say a gentle voice, but it's nothing like the noise that just happened. And God then says to the prophet, who I suspect has slowed down enough to listen. Number one, I want you to go and appoint a king over the Arameans and a king in Israel. And I want you to appoint Elisha as your successor. Here's your box of files. You'll see it in the corner. That ministry has just begun. And Elijah has already got his walking papers. God adds one thing that sort of chills me to the bone. I've got 7,000 people in Israel that haven't bowed the knee like you. They're not on the front page like you are. But you allowed yourself to get isolated. You forgot. It ain't about you. That's Ralph's reading of that story. Coming down now, just a little bit diminished. It reminds me of a church that was deeply conflicted, in which I served for many years. And the district superintendent came once, wanted to deal with the conflict, put up 2 big circles of chairs. Everybody came, sat in the outer circle. If you had a grievance, you were invited to the inner circle, where you could speak your grievance and you could choose who you wanted to listen to you. Then, I really love this, You stayed put and heard somebody respond to you. It's all well and good to fire your shots and run. It's another thing to sit there and see what the impact is. One person came with his wife in there and he said, I want to tell you, nothing spiritual is happening in this church, and we need to write Ichabod over the whole thing. Ichabod is a name that says the glory has departed. In other words, God's gone, nothing good's happened, we should shut the whole thing down, and I say so. So it's something like Elijah. And a woman got up and walked into the center and said, I heard you, I understand your grievance. I just want you to know this. Last winter, my husband was dying in our home. There were 2 elders and a pastor came over every Wednesday night, and they just simply prayed with us and took notes on what was happening. And after about 4 months, my husband got back up and went back to work. So I want you to know that if it weren't for this church, my husband would be dead. Now, after you pronounce Ichabod on the whole thing, that's the last thing you want to hear. What you want is for God to make an exit. Go. Leave this place and justify me. And it wasn't happening. Didn't happen here either. And I thought when I saw that, Lord, duct tape my mouth shut. Because I'm prone to make statements like that, and I just get the message, judge nothing before the time. And I guess I don't get to set the time for judgment. Okay. And neither did Elijah. So down he comes, and he's got some work to do. And among the tasks that he has is to call someone named Elisha, who's got a custom plowing business. No idea where Elisha came from and why they're calling somebody with a custom plowing business into the prophet's business. But he walks along one day as he's driving a team box and takes off his mantle and throws it over his shoulder, which is the way, that's where we get the word, let your mantle fall on me. That's where it comes from. And it's a way of saying, tag, you're it. And Elisha knows full well just what happened to him. After a minute, Elijah said, I got to go home and say goodbye to everybody. And Elijah says, whoa, what have I done to you? You know what you've done to me. So he broke up all the plows, set them on fire, slaughtered the oxen, and had the biggest barbecue you have ever seen. And left everything like disciples did once and followed somebody who did the same thing to them. His name was Jesus. And there he is, like wholly given over to something he never even thought of. And then he's got years of following this man who's in the face of king after king after king, sometimes in home policy, sometimes in foreign policy, saying to him, the way you're going isn't right. And not making any friends in the process. That brings us to the text of the day. Because the counterpoint to all of his actions is the solid awareness, which he has probably gotten through to Elisha. My days are numbered. One day, God is pulling the plug in my ministry. But who knows what day that is? Until, as the text tells us, just before God took Elijah to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on a walk out of Gilgal. They could have been on a walk out of anywhere, but it's Gilgal that this story originates in. And Elijah said to Elisha, stay here. God has sent me on an errand to Bethel. Now, there are many times in which a servant would have been told, stay here, stay there, go over here, buy this, buy that, wash my clothes. That's what a servant did. But on this particular day, for reasons that aren't clear to us, Elisha's not having any of it. And Elisha said, not in your life. I'm not letting you out of my sight. So they both went to Bethel. And this whole sense of foreboding, premonition, comes over the whole story. I'm not letting you out of my sight. But you've got to ask, you're going to handcuff him, Elisha? Tie him up, maybe? Exactly what do you think you're going to do? You're going to cling to something, okay? We'll see how that works. The guild of prophets of Bethel, then, since they're going on an errand to Bethel, meet them and say, did you know that God is going to take your master away from you today? So somehow this has become knowledge in a broader circle. Yes, says Elisha, I know it. But keep it quiet. Now, there's all kinds of interpretations as to what keep it quiet means. Maybe it means we don't want to riot out there, so don't let the people know. I think it means I don't want to talk about it. Because quite frankly, I don't know where this is going. And I don't think you do either. Some of us, when we don't have that kind of closure, tell me where this is going. I need to know where it's going. Yeah? You want to force where it's going so that you can feel secure? We do that, don't we? It's called closure. Premature closure. I don't know. Then Elijah said to Elisha, stay here. We're at Bethel. God has sent me on an errand to Jericho. And Elisha said, not in your life. I'm not letting you out of my sight. So they both went to Jericho. By the way, Elijah's retracing the steps of Israel. This is not just your ordinary Sunday stroll. And the guild of prophets of Jericho came to Elisha and said, did you know that God is going to take your master away from you today? Yes, he said, I know it. I don't want to talk about it. Then Elijah said to Elisha, stay here. God has sent me on an errand to the Jordan. And by the way, that's the door. We're out. When you get to the Jordan, that was the port of entry of Israel into its land. If you're at the Jordan on the other side, that's the door out. And Elisha said, not in your life. I'm not letting you out of my sight. And so the two of them went their way together outside of the land of God, outside of the place where the covenant applies. The only thing that lies out there is the place where God made his covenant. So we're sort of back to square one, big time. Meanwhile, 50 men from the guild of prophets gathered some distance away while the two of them stood at the Jordan. So we got an audience to this. And they're sort of the witness, the testimony out there. We're watching what's going on. This doesn't necessarily mean they'll pick it up. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and hit the water with it, as Moses did on the day they crossed back the other way with the people many years before. And the river divided, and the two men walked through on dry land to the wrong side. So apparently God's still with us, at least to the other side of the river. Reminds me of that scene from the movie The Mummy, where they, if you've seen it, they're all on a trip into Egypt, and they've got a boat full of horses. The boat sinks in the middle of the Nile, and the bad guys with the horses go one way, and the good guys go to the other. The bad guys holler over, looks like we've got all of the horses, and the good guys from the other side said, yeah, and you're on the wrong side of the river. I hate that happens. And then it carries on. We're on the wrong side of the river here. We followed God, but we're on the wrong side of the river. Excuse me? When they reach the other side, note that. When they reach the other side, not a second before. When we're outside of any kind of safety whatsoever. And where it is not altogether clear where God is, what God's going to do now, or anything like that. Now, Elijah said to Elisha, what can I do for you before I'm taken from you? Ask anything. Now, Elisha said, I want your life repeated in mine. Literally what he said is, I want a double portion of your spirit, which doesn't mean I want to be twice as good as you. A double portion is what a son inherited from a father. He'll call him father for the first time in a few moments. I want to be the one who legitimately carries on your life and ministry. And I want you to give me that. I can hear Elijah say, I didn't get it from my dad. That's a hard one, said Elijah. But if you're watching, when I'm taken from you, you'll get what you've asked for, but only if you're watching. Watching what? Only if you're watching will you get this hard thing. Only if you're watching at the end. Reminds me of the the number of times in the Bible when God's people are called to watch, called to wait, and the emphasis that is placed on the people who actually did. For instance, the people who were still watching for the birth of Christ 400 years, still watching for the advent of John the Baptist, still watching 30 years later for the advent of Christ's ministry, still watching at the cross saying, what just happened here? Still watching on Bad Saturday, that's between Good Friday and Easter Sunday, when not a thing was happening except that we can smell a rotting corpse. The ones who are told, just wait in Jerusalem until you receive the Spirit, and they're waiting. You'll get what you ask for, but only if you're watching. The words ring in my ears. Don't get distracted, Peter. You might miss something. So it happened. They were walking along and talking, and suddenly a chariot and horses of fire came between them, and Elijah went up in a whirlwind to heaven. Here's a connection with the Transfiguration, if ever there was one. Every once in a while, heaven opens in certain ways, and in Transfiguration, the revelation of the way things really are breaks forth, and you see it for a moment. The Transfiguration for the disciples was so moving, they said, let's move here. Let's stay here. Let's build 3 tabernacles. We'll find food somewhere. Let's never go anywhere else. This is wonderful. And Jesus took them back down the mountain. Here, Elisha sees what his mentor has said all along about God. You're the God of the angel armies of heaven. There are the angel armies right out there. I'm impressed, aren't you? Boom. Just land a few of these. We've got it made. But all Elisha, as he sees it, can say is, my Father, you, the chariot and cavalry of Israel, which again has been variously interpreted. So I'll give you my spin. I saw it. I loved it. It's gone. Everything's gone. Phew! Right into heaven. And you know what? It's just me. It's like Elijah said on the Mount of Horeb when he wanted God to start things again. It's just me. I'm the only one left. It's just me. I'm the only one left. We're here. And I can also hear Elisha saying, he told me to watch till the end. I presume this is the end. I'm still watching. Do you see anything? It's me in the sand on this far side of the Jordan. I'm out of town. I'm out of Elijah. It looks like I'm out of God. What was that? If you're watching, did I miss something? And when he could no longer see anything, he grabbed his robe and ripped it in 2 pieces. And I think that's the kind of mourning you do when you finally admit to yourself, it's a new day, things are over. This is the day you wake up after they said to you, you have cancer. This is the morning when you wake up after the first night of your honeymoon. This is the moment in which you realize that you really don't have a job. This is the moment in which you realize something isn't going to be the way you thought it was, or the world has fundamentally changed. And there is a leaving of one thing without any real guarantee about a new thing. What do you do then? That's where he's at. But at least he can grieve for what's gone. But then he looks down. Why did he look down? Because here is Elijah's cloak. Where did that come from? Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him. Really? Elijah's cloak. This is sort of a combination sleeping bag and picnic blanket that you wear around your shoulders, one size fits all sort of thing. Elijah's obviously not going to be needing it, but as it falls, it is also the mantle that fell across Elisha's shoulders and called him. And I can't help but think that every time he saw it, it reminded him, you have a vocation. You have been called to something. And it's still there. Let me get this straight. No power, no glory, no press. Just a vocation. More work. Really? Was that what I was supposed to watch for? picked it up. You know something? I love Elisha for picking up that mantle, because I think there was also an impulse that said to him, you're well into there, you're well shut up. Run! Run! Split! Get out of there! But he picked that mantle up, and he went back to the Jordan, and he stood there, just him. And he took Elijah's cloak, all that was left of Elijah, and hit the river with it, as he'd already seen done, saying, now, where is the God of Elijah? Where is he? In other words, I'm still here. It's just me. This is the mantle. I'm not putting it down. It's time for God to show up. Going back to work with only that is the biggest challenge, I think, that anybody can ever face. Now, where is the God of Elijah? And when he struck the water divided, and Elisha walked through. And I can just hear God saying, it's just me. But I'm God. Let's get back to work. Back they go. And Elisha, though he can't tell you what it is, knows there is a future because there is a God in it. And he's back to work in the process. I don't know how many times I have watched congregations go through challenges and changes such as this one is going through right now, in which something passes away and dies and something else is born. And I have watched congregations in which people have said, something has died, I'm out of here. And other people have said, we still have the mantle, let's pick it up and walk with it and see where this goes. Downtown Chicago, there was one such church that had a great ministry when all kinds of people lived nearby. Then they all moved out, and there was a great trough, and a whole lot of people, not of their ethnicity, moved in. And they called the pastor. By now, all the heads were gray. And the pastor said to them, what do you want? They said, well, we remember this church when it was full. We had children everywhere, and it was great. And he said to them, I can bring them back for you. The color of the children will be different. And I need you to keep writing checks and praying. His name was Ray Bakke. He started a massive movement called Urban Ministry of Renewed. I don't know how many churches that said this place can have life again. Now, that's a big ticket item. He's famous. Let me tell you about a church nobody knows about. In Mount Dennis in Toronto, a little Baptist church had exactly the same situation. My aunt was in it. And the greyheads in the church kept marching towards the back. But they said, boy, I could kiss every one of them for this. They said, we need a pastor from the Caribbean because we've got all kinds of Caribbean people that live in the area. And so they got a pastor from the Caribbean. He was black. And they filled that up. Then the people took a look and said, now we need another pastor who's Korean. Because the Korean people have moved in. And so they hired a Korean pastor. I was present in my aunt's kitchen when the Korean pastor and the Caribbean pastor gave her communion in her own home. And I watched the beat go on in that congregation. You walk by that little Baptist church, it is big, but it's full. And let me tell you, there's life. Because somebody said, what's that on the floor? Oh, look at that, it's a man. Picked it up and carried it. We finish with one other story that has just come to me this week, and this one stirs me to the ground. There is a church in northern Iraq, a Kurdish church among Kurdish people. They are Kurdish Christians. Most Kurds are Muslim, but there are Kurdish Christians there. And in northern Iraq, they have got just an avalanche of refugees because of the oppression under ISIS, who, by the way, and I need to remind you, most of the people they kill are Muslims. Most of the temples, rather mosques that they destroy, are Islamic mosques where they say, you're not my kind of Muslim. Most of the children that they abduct are Muslim children. These people have fled. The Kurdish church has gone on in its way as a minority church for centuries. And all of a sudden, there's an avalanche of Muslims with no home. You go to those churches right now, right here in the sanctuary, it'd be cots as far as the eye can see, except on Sunday morning. And people with jobs who have another job to come and pick up the cots so they can have worship, then put them all back down. Every Sunday school room is full and divided down the middle with a blanket. And those churches have people who are, and they're stretched to the limit, spending their time getting food, clothing, medicine, help, helping people get oriented in that church. And they're all Muslims. We're asked to pray for them. We're asked to resource them. You bet. Why? Because something new has happened. There is a new opportunity to find a new way of being together. One that does not involve bullets, but blankets. This is happening in hundreds of places. And it suggests the possibility of a new world. We could build a new city, Kathy. We could build it. We could build many. When I take a look at that, I think to myself, somebody could have said, you go on ahead, I'll wait for you here anymore. Somebody could have said, oh, there's a man on the floor, somebody should pick it up. But there's a congregation who said, I think it's us. We're here, we're still here. We have a call from God. Last week, he had CD family, non-Christian, attended the worship service and walked right up the aisle, in the middle of it, to the altar at the front. And they stopped the service and went down and said, what is your need? And they said, we want you to pray for our daughter, likely abducted. And there was a pouring forth of soul to soul, heart to heart. It doesn't get more intimate than that. You want to, I keep saying this, that's the news. That's God's news. That's what's happening on the ground. That's the new and living thing that's there. And if you're willing to stick around and show up for it, so will God.